Everybody, thanks for watching. Now, this series on ancient history is really going to get into the biblical transition of, real proven history into the Bible, into what people believe is actual history today. So basically, when you look at the Bible and you read about all the stories, you read about the wars of the Israelites or what have you, you have to understand, as I stated before, this stuff is from proven history. This is why you get the Hebrews and some of the Christians saying, well, black history is in the Bible is all true, it's proven, But you have to understand, just like they plagiarized from Kemet, they took real history, real proven history, and plagiarized it and just, changed it around to fit the Bible. But just like I say to the Hebrews and to the Christians, nobody else wrote about those civilizations. Nobody else wrote about the Hebrews. We should find in different civilizations around the world, what these people did. Other people should have spoke about them and what have you. We don't find that. But we do find that as it pertains to what I'm going to talk about in this video. This is going to really bridge a big gap that you're going to have, a big void, because there's a lot of stuff in history. And as you have seen with Buddhism or what have you, I'm going through history and trying to connect the pieces. You're going to get a huge connection after this first DVD in this series. But you can see where it's a lot of stuff in history that's missing. A lot of pieces, a lot of things don't fit. A lot of things are not clarified, in the Bible when you're reading them. So when you understand how these things fits to actual real proven history, you can see what it's trying to tell you. When I talk about the code, when I'm talking about the code in the book, these are what I'm talking about. Because in these stories that we can go back and look to actual real history, you can see where it fits and what the story is actually trying to tell you and reveal to you about the powers that be, about their agenda, and about what's going on. It's all laid out. It's deep. It's deep. And we're going to go through this and really get into, the Phoenicians and Babylonians and, right around that time when I talked about what happened to Kemet, because this is where it begins. This is why it seems like everything goes back to Kemet, because this is where it really starts. There's a bunch of history before that, but as far as what we have been seeing from the powers that be, this is where it begins. So we're going to begin with, Genesis, the garden. So the Garden of Eden story. I always like to go to the garden. As I said, it's a lot of hidden stories, a lot of hidden things wrapped up into those stories. But in this case, you have to ask yourself, what is missing from Genesis? When you think about the Genesis story, you get the creation of heavens and earth and, planets or what have you. But what is missing? And what's missing is the war, the fall of Satan. What exactly happened? Why is that story missing from Genesis? It should be there. It's the reason why we found it in Ezekiel and Isaiah. And it's, so far from the Genesis story. This is supposed to have happened before Adam and Eve, but it should be there. But this also tells you that there is a gap. There's a time gap. There's a lot of time missing. If God created the heavens and the earth and, all of a sudden we get man and we get Adam and Eve, there is some time missing. What's going on? Then all of a sudden, Satan shows up in the garden. There's a lot of time missing. And it's a reason why, they put it that way. So when you get to Ezekiel and you start reading about the story in Ezekiel 28, well, matter of fact, we'll go from 11 to 13, keep it kind of short. But when you start reading in Ezekiel 13:1, it's talking about, he's talking to Tyre, to the king of Tyre. As a matter of fact, he's talking to the prince. That's another thing you got to understand translations in a lot of the versions. In some translation, it translates into prince in most of them. But in some, it translates into king. But it starts out with Ezekiel basically speaking to the prince of Tyre or Tyrus. Understand Tyre is Tyrus, same thing. Get into that. And he's talking to him and basically telling him that God is condemning him for basically, claiming to be a god. So he's basically condemning the prince of Tyre or Tyrus for claiming to be a god. And then as you go on, you realize that, he's starting to talk to the king of Tyrus. And basically what he's explaining to the king, fits the story of Satan. This is one of the things you got to understand. When you start getting into the story of Satan, it's confusing. It's confusing, and you'll see in a second. So we read here, Ezekiel 28, 11 through 13. It says, "Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, take up lamentations upon the king of Tyrus, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord God, Thou seatest up the sum, full of wisdom, and perfect in beauty. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God." Think about that. "Every precious stone was thy covering, the sardius, topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, and the carbuncle, and gold, the workmanship of thy tabrets," which tabrets are these things right here, "and of thy pipes were prepared in thee in the day that thou wast created." So it starts out with him speaking to the king of Tyrus. So clearly, and what he's saying cannot pertain to him, but it's talking to him. But we know for damn well this man wasn't in the Garden of Eden. We know that this human man can't have, these jewels built into his being. So we understand this verse is to be talking about Satan. A lot of scholars are in disagreement on the verses and what it actually means. Some people think that, it's, him trying to basically compare what the king of Tyrus is doing to what Satan did. That doesn't fit. A lot of scholars believe that the king of Tyrus was possessed by Satan, which makes a lot more sense. But when you read it, they seem to be coupling Satan with this man. Think about that. Why are they making a comparison? Why is it coupling Satan with this man? It's not being definitive and saying what's exactly going on. Is this dude possessed by Satan? Are you talking about Satan, which clearly he has to be? Who else was in the garden? Nobody else but Adam, Eve, the serpent, God. Definitely wasn't this dude. So what's going on? But we see this coupling of this story of Satan with the man. We see it again in Isaiah. So we read Isaiah 14, 12 through 16 says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nation? For thou hast said in thy heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee, and consider thee, saying, Is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms?" Did you pick up on that? It said, "Is this the man that made the earth to tremble?" That basically brought down the kingdoms. Is this the man? See, a lot of people, when they think about Satan, we hear him referred to as, the serpent, the dragon, the beast, Lord of the things that fly, Lord of the air, what have you. A lot of people don't conceive man, because when you say the word man, you think of man, mortal man. So how could this man be Satan? How could Satan be a man? Satan's supposed to be an angel, Lucifer, the light bringer, what have you. So when you look at the verse, it's clearly saying, is this the man? So when scholars look at this, they say, well, it can't be talking about, Satan. Satan's not man. I mean, it's clearly saying the man here. That word is not a misinterpretation in the ancient manuscripts. It says man. So what is it talking about? Again, coupling Lucifer, Satan, with man. What's going on? Why is it making this comparison? And you will have to stop and think. If Satan is not a man, if he is to bring down the nations, the only way he can do it is if he get man to do it. If he possess a man or, influence man to do it. Any way you want to slice it, it has to be a man that's going to actually, bring down the nations. It has to be men. It has to be a man. It can't be him. So you have to really think about that. But again, it's coupling Satan with man. It's giving a comparison of Satan with man. Just like in Ezekiel, you have man and Satan. So think about that. So you look at the Genesis story, we understand about Satan being there. But it's not giving us the story of Satan. What happened? How does he know what he know? What is he doing in the garden? Doesn't get into all that. But then, as I said, we go to Ezekiel, we go to Isaiah, and we see these stories that I just read about the sort of, origin of Satan, but it's not 100% clear. It's not clear. Now, a lot of people do not understand that. A lot of people don't get that. You would think that somewhere in the Bible, even if you're one of the people who don't read it, that there is this definitive story about what's going on with Satan. A lot of people go to Revelations and get confused about the story, about the war. A lot of people get confused about what's going on and don't understand if it's talking about before or after. Is it talking about at the end or about the war in heaven? And when I say the war in heaven, I mean when it first went down. But in this case, the key here is Tyrus or Tyre. So you have to understand it's the same place, talking about the same thing. As you can see here, this is what it basically looked like on the map. We're going to deal a lot with this place. There's a lot of history wrapped up in here. It's unbelievable. And we're going to get into it. Let's read. The Phoenicians, city of Tyre, a rich history of industry, mythology, and conflict. According to tradition, the city of Tyre was founded in 2750 BC and is considered one of the world's oldest metropolises. Think about that. For much of its history, Tyre has played an important role in the region. The Tyrians were master seafarers and explorers. By sailing around the Mediterranean, the Tyrians made contact with other civilizations and founded colonies. As a result, Tyre had a special place in a number of ancient Mediterranean communities. Greek mythology states Europa, for whom the continent of Europe was named, you see where we're going, was a Phoenician princess of Tyre who was abducted by Zeus in the form of a bull and brought to the island of Crete. On the island, Zeus revealed his identity, and Europa became the first queen of Crete. One of Europa's brothers was Cadmus, who according to legend brought the alphabet to mainland Greece. In addition, the Tyrians also founded colonies, the most famous of which is Rome's greatest rival, Carthage. It is believed that this city was founded by another Tyrian princess, Dido, who left Tyre to escape her evil husband. It is said that when she arrived in North Africa, she requested a small piece of land from the Berber king, Larbus, and subsequently founded Carthage. The story of Dido is most vividly portrayed in Virgil's Aeneid. So we're talking about Tyre or Tyrus, and you see how they do it. In the Bible, you got Tyrus, but it's really Tyre, Tyrus, Tyre. When you see one of the names, it's talking about the same place, a city in Phoenicia. Now, understand one, of course, Phoenicia is basically, modern day, today is Lebanon. But we understand this is where Europa comes from, which Europa gives us Europe. So again, you see where we are headed. We're talking about Europe, we're talking about the Europeans. Huge history going on here that we're going to get into. So, understand one, of course, this land, didn't belong to the Phoenicians. You got to understand what the Phoenicians is. This was clearly part of Egyptian territory when you understand the Egyptian kingdom. It was part of the Egyptian empire, that land for a long time. Don't let history fool you. We're going to get into this. But it was a part of Egyptian territory. Now, the name Phoenician was given to it, by the Greeks. The Greeks is the one who named it Phoenician, or, the Phoenicians. And it comes from the Greek word phonikos. So Phoenician comes from the Greek word phonikos, which means purple people. Phonikos, purple people. So this is where we get Phoenician. And what are the purple people? They call them purple people. One, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, we get so black, we can look purple. That's not it. But Phonikos or Phoenician, that purple people thing comes from the morax. The morax is basically a shellfish or like a sea slug kind of sort of. Basically, it emits this purple dye that is very strong. It doesn't just wash off or come off. So a lot of people, wanted to use it because it actually got stronger in the sun, So if you use that purple dye, it actually got stronger. So this is why they call them purple people, because the people who worked in there, getting these shells out in the water, of course, the dye would cover them up and it would be like purple, when it came out. So Phoenician comes from Phonikos, and the Greeks are the one who came up with that name. So now most people, when they think about the Phoenicians, when they think about that land, Some people think about the Persians, think about Arabs. Some people think about Europeans being there. A lot of people, when they think about the Phoenicians, don't take it back to black people. And this is one of the problems. There's a lot of debates when people start getting into ancient Phoenician. Who was the Phoenicians? Who was the Phoenicians? Was they black? Was they white? What have you? And you can understand why when you start going into that history, especially when you see the Greeks talk about in their mythology getting a language, which we'll get into that. But a lot of people don't, associate it with African people or black people. But the land was clearly Egyptian territory, plain and simple. You go there and you have the Temple of Obelisk and Byblos. Now, when you go to Byblos, you have the Temple of Obelisk, still stand to this day. We're talking dating over, 1000 BCE. And the temple's still there. You can see it's all these obelisks, all these little, statues or what have you there, as well as other Egyptian artifacts and Egyptian sites there as one of the tourist attractions when you go there. Now, you start going back over, you can see, not too far away is Tyre, the city of Tyre. Not that far. You keep going over more, and guess what else you run into? You run into Israel. You keep going over, of course, more, and of course, Egypt. All of this was Egyptian territory, of course. They had all this land, all this space. There's going to be a lot of, things that you research and see that's going to try to fit biblical history within there. Whenever you see that, keep reading because you need to know the bullshit. But it's bullshit, plain and simple. But this was Egyptian territory. The stuff that's there, which they won't dare get rid of because they make money off it, as a tourist attraction, is still there to prove who the area belonged to. Now you have to think about something, because you have the Phoenician alphabet, you have Egyptian, and of course they're different. We're going to get into that as well. But you have to realize what the Phoenician territory was, what Tyre was, what that area was. Since it's on that coast and you have the only other way that you can get in there, if you're Greece or what have you and you're trying to come there, this is the place where you would have to land, as far as a ship. So if you're going to be doing trade, or anything with people in that area, like Syria, what have you, Lebanon, Israel, you need a closer port, which that port would be the closest port. So what the Egyptians did was they basically left that port open. They left Tyre basically open, that city, and that whole area up to Byblos. All that area was basically like an open seaport where you had so many different countries coming in there trading. They was trading, they had a lot of merchants there. There was a lot of marketplaces. They, had goods that was bringing into other countries. This is what everybody talks about. It's well known. Tyre is well known. A lot of people talk about it. A lot of historians talk about it. But everybody know it as the people who was living there was like, fishermen and real seafaring people who traveled out, who knew everybody. So it's even in the Bible. So when you read in Acts 21:3, it says, "Now when we had discovered Cyprus," which we know Cyprus is right there, "we left it on the left hand and sailed into Syria." Now, I don't know how the map was back then, but you can't sail into Syria, easily today. "And landed in Tyre, for there the ship was to unload her burden." In other verses, it says unload her cargo. So they just, King James Version, kept it old school. But it says to unload her cargo, of course. Now, as I said, you're going to read a lot of stuff. You're going to start reading stuff about the Philistines and the Hebrew Israelites, some kind of war and all this kind of drama going on. It's bullshit. All of this is there to give validity to the Bible, plain and simple. We understand what happened in history. This was Egyptian land. What happened? We know who conquered that area was the Persians. So when you look at this little relief here, what it say down here, it says 500 BCE or the 5th century BCE, excuse me. Of course, we know in the 5th century, this is around the time when, the Persians took that land. So you see clearly, one, when you just look at recorded history, it all matches up. That's just one of the things we're going to go through in this video. And you're going to see recorded history matching up with the Bible, debunking the Bible. As I said, there's no way you can read the book. And if you read the book and you know history, game. Plain and simple. This is why they have to hide history, why they have to distort it. But that area clearly, belonged to the Egyptians. Now, and of course, because, Phoenicia was an actual place, You find a lot of artifacts around that area from the Phoenicians. You go into Spain, you find from the Phoenician period in Spain, artifacts in Spain. But of course, the Phoenician period was the Egyptian period because they were Egyptians. But you find artifacts pertaining to the Phoenicians throughout the area, the so-called Middle East. And we can find this stuff. This is how we know these people were real. They actually existed because this was a trading port and so many people was coming in and out and buying goods, Egyptian stuff as well. And we can find this stuff. This stuff exists. This is how we know. This is how when you do research in history, if we ain't finding it pertaining to the Hebrews, it's not, they didn't exist. It's not real. So when we look, we know the history. We know that, again, the Persians came in, conquered that Egyptian land, which Tyre was a part of the Egyptian territory. They came and they took it. Then we know that the Greeks came and took it from the Persians. So now what I talked about in the video on YouTube about the Hebrew Israelites, when I talked about, the Bible, as far as the Bible using its stories, the Bible they're trying to basically justify the genocide and slavery of African people. This is what the Bible was talking about. We talked about that in those videos because the Bible was giving you all these stories about the conquest of these lands. And a lot of people don't realize, even though they hide them, with different names, that these lands are pertaining to African people. The Hittites and the Perizzites and the Jebusites and all that stuff like that. It's talking about African land that they took and said that God, allowed them to take it. This is what it's pertaining to. So you got to understand the story. We know, again, Greeks came in there, took it from the Persians. So you got to understand Tyre was a huge city. You had Tyre and you had Tyre, the mainland. And you had Tyre, you see that part that sticks out in the water. It was an island, unto itself for a while, for a long time. But you had, when the Greeks came in there, Alexander and his troops basically slaughtered everybody on the mainland, and they basically killed a bunch of people, and they enslaved whoever they could enslave. A lot of people bought their way out of the whole situation. Some people couldn't, but they basically, was recorded as them slaughtering so many people and completely destroying the city. Decimating it. They came in with all kinds of, battering rams and stuff and just basically laid the city to rubble. Then the people who, fled to the island. So you had the Phoenician people and the people who was there basically jump in their ships and go out to the island. A lot of people kept going, but the people who couldn't go anywhere else went to their home on the island. As you can see, it was, as I said, it was an island. So, for the next 7 months, Alexander and his troops went on killing and destroying, killing people, enslaving people, and destroying the city. But what they did was they used the rubble from the city to basically build a causeway from the mainland of Tyre to the island of Tyre. And in 7 months, they had that causeway built. And in 7 months, they went to that island and completely massacred about 30,000 people there. And the same situation occurred where some people bought their way out, some people couldn't, the rest got enslaved or got killed. So he finally did end up taking that island and killing a bunch of people. So you can see now how it looks. The causeway is there, but it wasn't there before. And it is attributed to Alexander. This is something that everybody knows. The Romans have a monument there to this day, pertaining to Alexander. This is history, people. This is recorded history. And it doesn't fit with the Bible. So it's funny how, when we look at their book, this is how they try to hide, away from it and say that, of course they're not going to say they wrote the book. But this is how we can look at actual recorded history and see it doesn't fit with what the Bible's saying. But we can read the Bible and get the clues and see that this is where they stole their stories from and put them in the Bible. But real history says something different. So again, when we go to Ezekiel, and understand, take note that this stuff is all in Ezekiel. When we talked about before, about Satan and all that stuff in Ezekiel as well. So we read in Ezekiel 26, 3-6, it says, "Therefore thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Tyrus," which Tyrus is Tyre, "and will cause many nations to come up against thee, as the sea causeth his waves to come up. And they shall destroy the walls of Tyrus and break down her towers. I will also scrape her dust from her and make her like the top of a rock. It should be a place for the spreading of nets in the midst of the sea, for I have spoken it, saith the Lord God. And it shall become a spoil of the nations, and her daughters which are in the field shall be slain by the sword, and they shall know that I am the Lord. So we know it's all bullshit, but this is how you prove that the Greeks are the ones who created the Bible. This is how you prove it. One, who else would know about this history? Now, I just told you about the story about how Tyre was laid siege by Alexander, but then you read in the Bible, in Ezekiel, them talking about, God, the Lord, basically sending nations against Tyre. Now, we know there was nations that basically came up against Tyre. I won't say many nations, it was basically two, the Persians and the Greeks. So, we know they came in, but who sent them? Was this God, from the Bible destroying Tyre, or is it what we just read? And we know, you could basically say, yeah, it's God, because they are God, plain and simple. All they done is talking about what they did. So we know that these people basically proclaim themselves as God. That's what's hidden in the book. They are the people who they are talking about when it's talking about the Lord and God. Like I said, it's no coincidence that we have the Lord in the Bible, and that's what English people call each other, lords. So no coincidence. These people know who they are, and they put themselves in the position as God in the Bible, and it's easy to break through that. So, it's crazy. The Greeks and the Romans been calling each other gods, proclaiming themselves to be gods for hundreds of years. So when a black man say he God, he tripping. Oh, that nigga tripping, talk about something, he God. The Greeks and freaking Romans been saying they're gods, big statues and monuments to themselves, to the Caesars or what have you. As soon as we say it, we tripping. And these people stole everything they know from us. So understand, again, the whole metaphor of God goes back to them. And what they're doing is them proclaiming, exactly what they did. It's all bullshit. It's all bogus. But this is how we can go in and see who wrote what. So on the one hand, you have the Bible giving us the story of Tyre, but then you have actual recorded history talk about something completely different. So it's going to get even more deeper. We're going to decipher this thing real quick using the Bible and actual history. And it's easy. Because the thing is, one, a lot of people read this stuff and get confused. But as I said, when you know the Bible and you know real recorded history, it's easy to break down, as I'm doing right here. But again, let's go to Ezekiel again. Ezekiel 26:7 says, For thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will bring upon Tyrus Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, a king of kings from the north, with horses and with chariots and with horsemen and companies and much people. There is no proof of a Nebuchadnezzar coming into Tyre and basically laying siege to the place. There's no proof. We're going to bust it up in a second to prove the point. So understand, one, when I talked about before, when you hear about the Philistines and Hebrew Israelites, what have you, in Tyre, it's all bullshit. They're trying to create this faulty timeline again to try to make it an inconsistency in the rulership of Kemet. Because if they can do that in the rulership of Kemet and the Egyptian territory, then they can interject, their people in history. Because remember, they got to fit themselves in history somehow, some way. They got to try to fit themselves in there. By them saying, well, the Egyptians didn't always rule this land, but they did. Because we know we can prove it. But they'll admit that the Egyptians did rule Phoenicia. But they say, well, it was off and on, off and on. But the Egyptians, being the cool people that they is, basically said, all right, we own this territory. We basically teaching y'all anyway. Let's just use this land, because the Egyptians was basically neutral because they work with everybody. Let's use this land so nobody won't feel cheated, and let these people come in and use this land as a port. Again, Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark and them talked about how much good the Egyptians did for everybody. Even when people go and look at the artifacts and the history of that land, they see it pertain to many people. But everybody it goes back to the Egyptians. So when they find a lot of the artifacts from, the Phoenician times, it goes back to many different countries, different people, because the Egyptians let so many people win there. So, all the Greeks had to do was take real history and distort it. stuff that you can go back and kind of say, maybe it's possible. Cast out, conceal it, distort it, so they can kind of interject, history in there. And this is exactly what they did. So it's saying that God sent Nebuchadnezzar there to basically destroy the city. Now, bullshit. Prove it. Prove that Nebuchadnezzar came there and destroyed it. Can't prove that, especially when we have already recorded history, proven history of Alexander destroying the place. So again, Bible says one thing, proven history says something else. Nobody can prove that he came in there. It's not possible. So the thing is this, and again, this is how you bust open history bust open the Bible by understanding history. Again, the only Nebuchadnezzar, because there's a bunch of them, the only Nebuchadnezzar that could have been close to the time that this happened with the destruction of Tyrus, either one, the only Nebuchadnezzar that could have been there during that time was Nebuchadnezzar II. But he died in the 6th century BCE, which is long before the destruction of Tyre. So that's the only Nebuchadnezzar that can be even close to that time in actual history. So we know, no, it wasn't Nebuchadnezzar. So again, this is how you catch the Bible. Now, this is important. And the way that we prove this is, one, to go back to the Bible, to Ezekiel. Ezekiel 26:14. Remember, it says, "And I will make thee like the top of a rock. Thou shalt be a place to spread nets upon. Thou shalt be built no more." This is the so-called prophecy of Ezekiel. Thou shalt be built no more. For I, the Lord, have spoken it, saith the Lord God. Now, the only time that Tyre was destroyed to where it was built no more began with Alexander. And we're talking about the 4th century BCE. Long after that Nebuchadnezzar that's close to this time frame, had died already. So we're talking the 4th century BCE. So that's important because ever since Alexander destroyed the place, you had the Romans coming later and basically take it from the Greeks, and they built on it, and then that got torn down by the Arabs. So this ruin that I showed you with the basically the temple of the obelisk or what have you is ruins. That whole area is a tourist attraction to this day. It's still in ruins. It's nothing built on there. You can see the remnants of Rome there, the remnants of Greece there, the remnants of the ancient Egyptians, but it has never been rebuilt, the city that was destroyed. So this is the so-called prophecy, which again, it's one of those prophecies where it's bullshit. What's to stop anybody from going there, the government from going there right now and rebuilding the place? Now, one, is a landmark, so they can't do it. So this is how you fulfill the prophecy. Oh, we're making a landmark, nobody can build there. But nothing ain't really stopping people from building except for humans, men. This ain't God or no angels stopping people from building. It's permits, laws, legal shit that can be fixed by humans. So it's not no real prophecy. So understand, again, this is how you fix that whole thing. This is how you figure that whole thing out. We know, one, it's not Nebuchadnezzar because he wasn't allowed during that time. Two, the prophecy, its own prophecy in the Bible, only fits around the time when Alexander in real history actually destroyed the place. So again, all the Greeks had to do, because remember, the King James Version was written between 1604 and 1611. So all they had to do was basically, they know the history, they know what happened, was put this in the book. They understand recorded history is already documented by many people. All they had to do was put it in the book, distort it, and make it as if, it fits with biblical history. Because when you go back during that time, you can say, well, such a thing happened. I guess it's talking about them. No, this is actual history. So we know it's bullshit when it's talking about Nebuchadnezzar. Now, another one of the daggers that basically gives it away we can find in the Bible. Again, talking about Alexander. The only person this fits is Alexander. So when you read again in Ezekiel 26:12 says, "And they shall make a spoil of thy riches, and make a prey of thy merchandise, and they shall break down thy walls, and destroy thy pleasant houses." As I said, Alexander destroyed the houses. "And they shall lay thy stones, and thy timber, and thy dust in the midst of the water." Okay, so who did that? We know it's talking clearly about Alexander and about how he tore down the cities. He took the rubble, he took the trees, took everything and built that causeway to get to the island. It's right there in the Bible. But does it talk about Alexander? No. It's trying to divert you away from actual history, because if you follow actual history, it'll lead you to the truth, of course. But we can see what it's pertaining to. So again, you have them taking real history, distorting it, changing it, but leaving enough in there for you to figure out exactly who it's talking to. And that's for the Masons. That's for the Masons. The Masons understand. They can go in the book and understand, what it's talking to, who it's pertaining to. That's for the historian as well. Because if you're a historian, well, wait a minute, damn. This can't be. This is Alexander's story. It's clear as day. But you heard people before say, Alexander is in, the Bible, what have you. Yeah, he's in there. But it's not talking about him in name specifically. But we can understand it's alluding to him to get people to break it down and understand what it's really talking about. So now, remember in the Saturn and Satan series, we talked about Alexander. We talked about their whole story. And, we're going to get into that in a second. But remember, Tyre was basically being destroyed because the man proclaimed to be a god. So when you go to Ezekiel 28, as we talked about before, it is talking about the story of Satan. Remember, it's basically trying to couple Satan with this man. It's trying to give you this comparison. So he's addressing the king of Tyre, but he's talking about Satan. It's giving you this comparison in Ezekiel as well as in Isaiah. Remember, it said a man specifically. So remember, go back to the story of Alexander. We talked about how, he is the only person, who fits this story. He's the only person you can look to that actually proclaimed to be a god, who was a man that we know existed. So remember in the story with Alexander, you had his mom. Alexander proclaiming to be a god because his mom was basically seduced by Jupiter, which Jupiter would be the Roman equivalent of the Greek Zeus. So remember the depiction when you had Olympias in the bed and Zeus on top of her with like the serpent lower half. And this is basically where, he basically seduced Olympias and Alexander was born. And remember, Olympias tells Alexander on his way out to battle that, he basically is the son of a god. And he was walking around proclaiming to be the son of a god.